So first of all, hello. My name is Andy Chandler, and I'm the managing director here at Barefoot Coaching, and I'm lots and lots of things. So I don't know about you, but I wear loads of different hats, all of the time. I'm a dad, a brother, husband, son, friend, uncle, great uncle, coach, team coach, tutor, people pleaser. Interesting. Come on to that in a bit. I'm all of those things. But whoever and whichever version of you is turning up to today, just relax. It's kind of midday pretty well for everybody on this call. We're not far off it being midday. This could be your one opportunity just to have a bit of space for you. So I salute you. We applaud you for taking some time out for you. Have you got some food? I hope you have, maybe a hot drink, and we'll get going. Really, really good to see you. This session is being recorded, just so you know. I don't think that makes any difference, but I just want you to be aware of that more than anything. And this is really a session devoted to handling difficult conversations, predominantly at work. But you know what? Really, it's just about handling difficult conversations. So we're going to talk about some ideas, some thoughts, some tools, some techniques. We've got loads to go through. We probably won't have enough time, and I'll feel unworthy for not having covered all of it. But you know what? We're going to give it a good go. That's what I think. So welcome. Good to see you. This is one of quite a few different webinars we've been running. So we've previously been running free lunchtime webinars on, he says, looking down his notes, loss, uncertainty, and grief. I've been running some on resilience in the workplace. Who doesn't need a bit more resilience right now? Freudian theories for coaches. I'm thinking about whether we should do Freudian theory for workplaces, actually. I think that could be very interesting. We have got a number of different webinars coming up in January and February next year as well, not least of which dealing with change and uncertainty in the workplace. The psychology of coaching at work. I'm looking forward to that one in particular. More on resilience, because they've proved to be very popular, and credibility for coaches as well. So there we go. So it doesn't really matter how you're joining this call, whether you're a coach, whether you're a leader, a manager, a team colleague, a mum, a dad, an uncle, a dentist, a doctor. I'm making it up now. Whatever you're here for, I'm hoping you'll get something out of this conversation in particular. Tiny bit about Barefoot Coaching before we go any further. For those of you that don't know us, we are here to make the world a brighter place through exceptional coaching. Yes, that is a hell of a statement, isn't it? But honestly, we're determined to play our part in making the world a brighter place. And we do this through the act of coaching in particular. And we do an awful lot around coaching, predominantly. That's fine. No problem. Thank you, Veronica. I like that. Thank you. So we predominantly do a number of different things. We train people to become coaches. We train people not to become coaches, but to use coaching skills to become better, whatever it is that they want to be. We provide additional development for existing coaches. So if you're an existing coach right now, and for example, you're interested in training to become a supervisor, or if you're interested in training to become a team coach, to our team coaching practitioner program, then that's the kind of development that we do. And we do coaching supervision, so we provide supervision, and we do a lot of coaching within organizations, whether that's one-to-one, group, or team coaching, and then just a whole pile of different types of personal development for everyone, and different coaching tools and products. They might get a mention, but I'm trying not to do too much product placement as we go throughout the session in particular. So I think that will do. I'm going to ask you a question, if I may. And the questions I've got for you is, when you think about handling difficult conversations, how do you typically respond to difficult conversations, and with whom are they easier or more difficult? So I'm going to invite you to use chat if you want to share some of your thoughts about your own relationship to difficult conversations. Be as open or as closed as you feel comfortable being. One of the things I wanted to say is that we'll keep the chat going in the background. For some people, they find the chat really distracting, and I get that. And therefore, if you find it really distracting, you have complete permission, not that you need it, but you have complete permission to ignore it and just don't look at the chat. And for those that really like the chat, I'm really good with that too. Fire away, use chat. Send as many questions and thoughts that are coming through your mind in the moment. That's really good. Thank you, Emma, for leading us off. So using the non-violent communication structure, we won't go through that today, but thank you. One of many approaches in terms of how we think about the way we choose to communicate in particular. But thank you for that. Meg, thank you. I'm better at it than I imagined. I love that, by the way. There's a lot in that, Meg. That's interesting. Thank you. Darren, welcome to the Procrastination Club. You are a member of Procrastinators Anonymous. You didn't realize, but today is actually the inaugural meeting of that group. So I love that in particular. Thank you. Let's have a look. Yeah, thank you, Maria. That's very interesting to think about both the gender challenge, which I think is very, very present, and also in organizations. I think there is also the kind of cultural and hierarchical challenges around difficult conversations. Really interesting. Thank you. Let's see what else is going on. Oh, Victoria. I don't know whether Victoria, you're a Victoria or a Vicky. I'm the same, by the way. Yep. Avoidance is a strategy, and it's an accepted strategy. It doesn't always work. I think it's regarded, if you remember, for those people that remember a bit of the work around Thomas Kilmann's conflict instrument. Don't know whether we're going to have a link on that, Chris. We probably haven't actually, but anyway, Thomas Kilmann's conflict instrument. Avoidance is one of the responses typically to conflict. The others, by the way, if I can remember them, are accommodation, just kind of rolling over and just saying, yeah, you're right, sorry. Compromise, which is somewhere in the middle. Competitiveness, which is actually, I don't care, I'm going to win this conversation. And then finally, there was the win-win, and I can't even remember what it's called, but you'll remember it, top right-hand side. It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, there we go. We'll get that in a second. Thank you. Let's see what else is coming out here. These are great notes as well. Thanks, John. Good for you. And I think the coaching approach around being curious and asking questions feels very important when we get into these areas of conversations in particular. Let me just have a look at what else is going on. Katerina, thank you, by the way, for responding. Yeah, so differentiating, I think, for us about how we are in our personal life and how we are in our professional lives as well. That's really interesting. We're going to look in a minute about the relationship we have in terms of difficult conversations, dependent on the quality of the relationship that exists with the person that you're having the conversation with in particular. Thank you, everybody. These are really, really wonderful. Yeah, Maria, I'm the same, by the way. And by the way, I think I'm emotionally quite volatile. I think we all have our moments, but I agree, when you're dealing with somebody who's particularly emotionally volatile, that can be very difficult. And Faye, yes, welcome. The people that lack self-awareness are harder to deal with. First of all, thank you. How amazing is that already, right? Start to appreciate other people's perspectives. Even just now, that exchange is so beautiful. So thank you for that. Let's talk about a couple of things. We're going to start with kind of enter stage left, the world of transactional analysis. I like this, the floating person type concept and framework. So this area, for those of you that already know, I'm telling you something you already know. For those of you that don't, this is the world of transactional analysis. It was introduced by Eric Berne back in the 1950s and 60s. Now, Eric Berne was interested really in understanding people, not so much from their personalities, but more about their social interactions. And so it was all about kind of personal development and understanding of others. So here we have a model. I'm going to start at the bottom of this particular model, if that's okay. Let me know on chat if you've seen this before, by the way, or if you haven't, actually. Either way, that would be good. So we start with injunctions. Now, these injunctions, Eric Berne and the world of transactional analysis, shortened to TA, by the way, would say that these are kind of negative commands that we receive, often outside of our consciousness, from either our parents or from authority and parental type figures in our formative years in particular. They can often be expressions of disappointment, frustration, or anger even, and unhappiness. So here are a few that I've included. There are lots of injunctions that we could look at, but we're not going to. And yeah, Eve, we're going to be sharing the slides afterwards. There'll be an email that'll come out. It'll have all the slides on it. So feel free, if you want to make notes, of course. But equally, we'll send the slides and there'll be a recording. So injunctions, here's some injunctions for you. So the don't feel injunction might be, when you hear people say things like, well, look, big boys don't cry, or, nice girls don't get angry. These are kind of commands that take place. We may not be fully aware of them at the time because, well, we're young, but don't belong, for example. This could be a kind of idea that the parents in some way judged our friendship groups in some way. Don't exist. Maybe this sounds awful, doesn't it? But you hear these stories of like, if it wasn't for you, I'd have a career now. I could have done this, I could have done that, but actually I'm not able to do that now. And don't be you. And that's perhaps when parents were looking for a child that was more like them. So TA starts with this idea that there are some kind of unconscious commands that take place that work at a certain level with each of us. And in our desire to be okay, in our desire to balance the books, so to speak, we have a number of kind of drivers that emerge. Now, all of us, if you read through these drivers, which are shown in the balloons on the diagram, these drivers you may recognize for yourself. And they become quite important because if these drivers are in play for any of us, then they become quite relevant to us having more difficult conversations. So, for example, if you've got a try hard type driver, if you kind of, it's all about you have to try hard, try harder, get it done, then actually what happens if you're in a conversation and in a difficult conversation where the other person maybe accuses you of not trying hard? Maybe if they say to you, well, look, actually, I don't think you're trying hard enough to get this to sort itself out. Potentially for you, there will be an impact. There will be an impact in the way that you receive that kind of feedback in particular. Hurry up. This is one of number of different drivers that I know I exhibit. I don't know what you're like, but I definitely feel this. So hurry up for me is best shown and best characterized in difficult conversations where I just get frustrated. Why is it so difficult? Why can't we find a way through this? My hurry up driver tries to push. And as a result of that, it doesn't always help me have the best conversation in the moment. There's that sense of impatience. There's that sense of kind of energy, which doesn't help. Please, well, we're going to come on to people pleasing in a while. But if you have a people-pleasing tendency and driver, I don't know, by the way, I wonder how many of you do have that. It'd be lovely if you want to declare your people-pleasing tendencies, join the party. But of course, what that can often mean is that we have a strong desire to be liked. It also means that actually we often put other people's needs ahead of our own. Thank you, Kirsty, for that, by the way. We often put other people's needs ahead of our own. So we're so focused on what's important on other people, we actually don't allow our own needs to come through. I'm going to talk about that in a minute when we talk about boundaries. Yeah, thanks, Darren, for the hands up. Get it. You're in good company, by the way, without a doubt. And if you're not a people pleaser, that's also fine. So thank you. Be perfect. So imagine if you have a strong perfectionist, you know what? I also have a be perfect driver. I mean, I think I'm almost all of these. But anyway, definitely, if you have this desire to be perfect, let's face it, when we're dealing with other people, the first thing that kind of happens is we have to surrender perfection. That's my view anyway. Maybe it's not right, but it feels true. Like Brené Brown, those of you who've heard of Brené Brown? Yeah, I've heard of Brené Brown. So they're scholar and author and leadership guru, an amazing woman. She talks about this idea that when you enter into a conversation, you can choreograph the first bit, like, how are you? And you can use a framework that we might share in a minute or a little bit later on. But in many ways, within a few minutes, you're into the messy middle of that conversation. And if you have a be perfect type driver, being in the messy middle of a conversation is just not where you want to be, because you can't guarantee perfection. You're kind of surrendering to wherever the conversation goes. Anybody recognize that? Yeah, and there's a really great one. Thank you, Lewis. She's got many, many great talks on Netflix. But yeah, if you get time, take a look at what she has to offer as well. So thank you. And then finally, be strong. And so be strong is less so for me a driver. You might recognize it for yourself, but you may recognize it in others when you're in difficult conversations, because they may be the people that perhaps do feel and have got all of those emotions going on for them, but they find it very difficult to admit vulnerability. They find it very difficult to say, sorry, look, I got that wrong. That didn't make any sense. I shouldn't have done that. They can often be seen as uncaring and unfeeling in particular. So I wanted to kind of start with this idea that actually we all have these drivers that are in play. And I'm wondering, do you notice these drivers in you? You probably do. The relevance here is we all have them, but let's work on the basis they all in some way influence the way that we have courageous or perhaps difficult conversations. So that's a kind of starting point for you. I do want to talk a little bit about boundaries. Here's one that here's a gift, by the way, that we're offering to all of you, which I hope you enjoy. So I mentioned earlier this kind of idea that when we're people pleasers, the reality is that perhaps it's because we don't have the kind of boundaries that we should have. We at Barefoot Coaching describe boundaries often as being like a house where all the doors and windows are left open, and we just let anybody come in and take what they want when they want. Anybody recognize that? Anybody recognize that for themselves? So we're so focused on making sure that perhaps we attend to other people's needs and boundaries. Sometimes we don't attend to our own. Sometimes we're not even clear what our boundaries are. So let's take an example. We've got some lovely kind of conversation starters here. These will come out afterwards. So you've got these. And by the way, honestly, spend some time on them. When I was in North London earlier this week with a brilliant client, kind of global leaders, we spent a bit of time on some of these boundaries, and actually it was fascinating. But let's just take that top sentence. I have the right to. So when we think about having boundaries around difficult conversations, if you were to complete that for yourself, what would you say you have the right to do? So I'm going to invite you to place in chat if you want to. You don't have to, by the way, but to place in chat if you want to, your kind of completion of that sentence. I have the right to. When it comes to difficult conversations, I have the right to. Let's just give you a minute to see what emerges as we kind of ask you to think about that particular sentence. Oh, Maria, thank you. So I have a right to be respected regardless of my opinion. That's beautiful, isn't it? So I have the right to be personally respected. My opinion may be something different. Love that. Thank you. Yeah, I have the right to be heard. Hamali, thank you. Hamali, thank you. I really love that indeed. I have the right to pause and reflect. Yeah, another really beautiful one there, Julie. How often, particularly, by the way, if you're afflicted by the hurry up driver, the idea of saying, look, can we just pause? Can we just think about this for a minute? It's not something that we always give ourselves permission to do. So I have the right to do that. Feels very powerful. Thank you. Flo, thank you. I have the right to express my rational and emotional reactions. Yeah, I really love that. So let's think about that from, we talk about these kind of three centers of intelligence often, don't we? The head, the heart, and you can't see, but the gut. And actually, when we can talk from all three of those places, it feels like there's much more flow and coherence to what we're trying to say. So I really love that. Thank you, Flo. Yeah, really nice. Yeah, nice one, Kirsty. Me too, by the way. But yeah, I have the right to take time out for myself. Kerry has the right to be true to herself. Nadia, the right to take a step away if I feel the conversation is not respectful, effective, or just go gather my thoughts if it gets overwhelming. I don't know what point we're taught not to do that. Do you? Like, really, I'm like staggered. At what point do we not kind of think it's so sensible for us just to call time and say, can we just come back to that? Anyway, there we go. We'll come back to that some other time. Cleo, you really do have a right to share your views and be heard. Lewis, thank you. You've got the right to take a break. So there's some really, really lovely examples here, by the way. So the invitation to all of you is take some time out anyway to think about your own boundaries. These boundaries transcend just difficult conversations. They're boundaries full stop, actually. So they could be just your rights at work. They could be your rights in the relationships and friendships that you choose to have. And you can see there are lots and lots of different questions there. So feel free to take some time out and to think about what your rights are. What do you think about that idea of having some boundaries? And what do you think, what happens to you when you start to write down your thoughts about what you have rights to? I'm interested in terms of how this is landing with you, this idea of boundaries and rights. Give me some feedback in chat. I'd love to get a sense from you about what it's doing. Yeah, it does, Nadia. Yeah, it really does. Not only setting boundaries, but I think safeguarding your boundaries, because it's one thing to say I've got a right to, but then actually what do you do when that right in some way is impacted? Very interesting that. Yeah, really nice. How else is it landing for people? Yeah, thanks, Hamali. Thank you. Yeah, you're working on setting boundaries. Good. I'm really pleased for you. Makes a big difference. I am constantly at work on my boundaries. So yeah, I really get that. Hello, David. Nice to see you, by the way. They do give you control, I think. Yeah. I mean, not complete control of everything, but they give you control of yourself. I love that. Thank you, David. Nice to see you, by the way. Hello, Sam. Yeah, really nice, isn't it? The idea of having boundaries for different aspects of your life, for different scenarios. Yeah, really like that too. Yeah, Laura, I know I need to be stronger in setting them. Thank you, but still worry about how others would perceive me, of course. Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? We know from those of us who are coaches the difference between kind of need to, should to, and would love to. So that's something for us to hang on to in the way we use that language. And at the point where perhaps you feel like, you know what, I'd love to set boundaries and I'd love to safeguard those boundaries, and you know you're in a place that maybe you've got even more power behind those things. Anyway, is that enough on boundaries for the time being? He says manipulatively, nodding. Okay, all right, got it. Let me just have a quick look. 1 second, Louise, I've just seen your note come through. Let me just have a look. Lovely, Louise. Good luck with that, by the way. Lovely to see you, by the way, again. Yeah, the shouty boss, really interesting. Yeah, so there is something, isn't there, about maintaining those boundaries, which feels very, very important, particularly when you've got somebody pushing hard against them. All right. Let's take another view. Then let's say, transactional analysis, Eric Byrne, thanks, kind of interesting. Floating person, injunctions drivers, kind of interesting. Recognize some of that stuff going on. And then we have a bit of a conversation about boundaries. But let's just say there is also something about the relationship that matters here when we're having a conversation or having a difficult conversation. Here's a quote from Steve Radcliffe. Let me just go quiet for a second while you read this and while I take a little drink. Hold on. My grown-up daughters call this my sippy cup, as if I'm a 5-year-old. I don't know why that is, but anyway, they seem to find it very funny. So Steve Radcliffe, right? I love Steve Radcliffe. If you get an opportunity to have a look at his book, Leadership Plain and Simple, he talks about this. So you have to have relationships big enough to get the work done. A big relationship is one where any conversation is possible. I really love his kind of definition of a big relationship being one where any conversation is possible. I mean, he actually says there's a kind of bigger part here, which is he says the reason why you have a big relationship is because big relationships allow you to make bigger requests and achieve bigger things together. It's not just about, it's a big relationship and it's a great relationship because I feel safe. I mean, that is important, but it's not just about that. It's about, because we have a big relationship, we are able to do things with that relationship that we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't have that big relationship. We are able to have any conversation. I've got a good example right now. For example, my relationship with Kim Morgan, the founder and CEO of Barefoot, is a really big relationship. There is just nothing that is kind of off limits. And that can be difficult as well. That can mean that we can talk about things that would be tricky, that could be sensitive, that could personally feel impactful and difficult in some way, and yet we can still do that. So how often do we think about what kind of quality of relationships do we have, about what kind of quality relationships do we have with other people? If we were thinking about relationships, we might be thinking about trust. Like, how do we build trust in the relationship? Surely the presence of trust can make a big difference in terms of making it easy for us to be ourselves. Of course, enter Stephen Covey. I love the emotional bank account. Stephen Covey's great. And for those of you who've seen this before, just put a yes in if you've seen Stephen Covey's work around the emotional bank account. And if you haven't seen it, then let me just give you a kind of heads up on this. So I think this might be interesting. So I love this. Stephen Covey compares the building of trust and the building of a relationship as being one of the equivalent to a bank account, really. He calls it the emotional bank account. So he kind of says, look, you build up credits in the account. And if you build up enough credits, you can make withdrawals and it's fine. Right. So, yeah, thank you. So some really nice yeses. And so he says, look, there are kind of 4 things that you can pay attention to that really help to build credits up. So keeping commitments as simple as just like when I do what I say I'm going to do, when I follow through on that, when I'm not being flaky, then actually that really helps to build up credits in the account. That trust comes through. Being loyal and showing respect, that plays out, doesn't it, in lots of different ways. But when I demonstrate loyalty and I'm respectful to other people, that can help to build trust in the relationship. Saying sorry, being vulnerable when we get things wrong. I had some great examples, by the way, at work this week where I really got some stuff wrong. And actually, I know that one, I didn't want to get it wrong, but I did. But I know that also I was quick to own that. I was quick to say sorry. And I meant it, by the way. It wasn't like some false humility, like, oh, I'm really sorry. I was really sorry. Like I'd made a mistake. I knew also that in doing that, apart from it being authentic to me, it would help to build and continue to build trust, even when I'd made a mistake. And then paying attention to small courtesies. I don't know what kind of small courtesies would count for you. For me, often they are the smallest of things, like somebody noticing I'm having a tricky day and just checking in with me. Somebody making me a cup of tea and just saying, look, looks like you're having a rough time. Here's a cup of tea. Just some demonstration that we're thinking about each other as humans. So Covey says that if you do these things consistently, then actually now and again, when you get it wrong or when things get tough and you have to make a withdrawal from that emotional bank account, there is enough credit in there to enable that to happen. Loads more that we could talk about. But I wonder, when you look at the emotional bank account, I wonder where you feel you're perhaps strongest. Like, where do you know, I'm really good at that, actually. I do that consistently. And I wonder where you feel you could or might have more work to do. And we'll just give you a minute to maybe just share your views around the emotional bank account. What are you noticing about where you are at around the emotional bank account in particular? Yeah, Maria, good at keeping commitments. I like that. 100%. Low, 100%. Maria, check you out. Love that. Thank you. Thank you for the emoji. What are other people noticing about where they are in the emotional bank account? Yeah, it's nice, isn't it, Verity? I like it too. Not everybody likes the emotional bank account because some people prefer to see the cloud in every silver lining. And thank you, Melody. Love that. Thank you. Thank you for the interaction. It's really lovely. Yeah, there is a real difference, Kerry, when we're in stress. I think we'll come on to that in a minute as well. For those of you, by the way, that like to be a bit more black-hatted, I haven't included it here, but I would refer you to the work of the veritable and wonderful John Gottman, Gottman. And John Gottman is a researcher, psychologist, therapist, who has been doing a lot of work in the area of those things which can put pressure on relationships in particular. For those of you that have read any Malcolm Gladwell books, I think Blink mentions a lot on John Gottman. And John Gottman's got a kind of equivalent to the emotional bank account, but it's a kind of inverse. And it's called the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. So these are the 4 behavioral traits to look out for in a doomed relationship. So I won't go through those now, but you might enjoy looking at John Gottman. Fascinating. The thing called the Love Lab, which is where he ran experiments to look at relationships and couples talking to each other. And he would look for the presence of these 4 areas in particular. So do take a look at it. Incidentally, if you're interested, the one big kind of indicator of a potentially doomed relationship, it's contempt. There we go, contempt. More to follow on that. I'm not going to go into it now, but yeah, John Gottman, look him up. Here's another tool for you if you want to do a little bit of work ahead of having a difficult conversation, or perhaps if you just want to make sense of what's going on. You can actually, of course, do a relationship audit. So here we go. It doesn't get much simpler than this, does it? But how often do we really do this? Up until I knew about the relationship audit, I hardly ever used it. I still keep connected to this as a tool. So the idea here is that you take your time to look at the people that you want to get a view on around the relationship, and you can score them from 1 to 10. And your call in terms of what 1 and 10 means, but typically 10 is, I've got a really big relationship that gets things done with this person. And you could say, I've got a really big relationship where any conversation is possible. And 1 is like, there's nothing going on here, like it's disaster, or it's just very, very weak, or it's just there is no relationship, and you're somewhere in between. So you can take the time to just form a view, list down the people that are important and put a score down. Probably worth saying a couple of things. The first is that we kind of know that whilst it's quite tempting to want to say, oh, I want every relationship to be a 10, you don't really need that, do you? I mean, some you may do. Like, it depends on what you want to do, doesn't it? It depends on what you need to achieve together. So if I take, for example, and I won't mention, producer Chris is in the background, one of the Barefoot teams. I'm not going to give names away here, but like there are some relationships that I have, often in the professional setting, where actually they have to be a 10. They like, I cannot compromise. They have to be a 10. There are other relationships where a 6 or 7 would do. It will be enough. It will be enough to get the work done. Because I also recognize, and you probably do too, that if you want every relationship to be a 10, that's a hell of a challenge, but it's also a massive investment. You're really going to have to work at that in particular. Yeah, that's true, Darren. People pleasers probably do want a 10. I've managed to just about learn that that is pretty difficult for me to achieve. Anyway, you can score your relationships in a place and in a way that makes kind of sense for you. What I would say is you'll probably end up with having to identify different actions for different people. So there are 3 buckets I often think of when I'm thinking about building relationships, or I'm thinking about relationships. Those buckets are, I might need to build a relationship in the first place. So it might be that the score is a 2 or a 1, because frankly, we're new to each other. We don't know each other, and we just need to do some work to actually build the relationship. It might be that actually the relationship is a 6 out of 10, and it's an existing relationship, but I need to grow it. It actually does need to grow a little bit. It needs to grow to a 7 or an 8. So there's kind of a grow activity. And then, of course, there's a third bucket, which maybe many of you recognize. I do, which is I need to repair the relationship. There's something that's happened that perhaps there's been a significant shift. Something is really damaged. I've maybe made more withdrawals from the relationship than I had credits for, or vice versa. And as a result of this in particular, there is work to do to repair. That is for another webinar. We won't cover it today, but this idea of there being different buckets, I think, is important. So there we go. Hope you like that. Yeah, that's lovely, Elliot. Thank you. I think, of course, the answer to that question is there's a combination of your own self-awareness, but also entering into a conversation with that individual about how they see the relationship. For me, it feels really, really important, doesn't it? And so how you get into that, there are lots of techniques. One is you just have a conversation about where do you see this relationship. I think that's really important. If you're working with teams, I do a lot of work with teams, in particular leadership teams. There are some nice techniques. I won't share them now, but there are some lovely techniques to actually get people to appreciate where do they see the relationship with each other. And when there are differences, how that can often be a very good thing, but also explore what are those differences? What's behind those differences in particular? Thank you. Love that. I do want to just talk about this. I like this model in particular. This is a really nice kind of bit of thinking. And so this model talks about We call it the zone of uncomfortable debate. It's not our work. And in fact, Chris, we need to make sure we put the source on here in particular, if we can. So the idea here is that in order to get to the heart of the matter, the reality is that we need to be prepared to enter and go through the zone of uncomfortable debate. I can give you an example here of kind of this model, really based on my current reality. I might actually just drop my voice down a little bit because Mrs. Chandler is in the house, and I'm about to share a story that is personal to myself and my wife. So we have been painting and decorating the house. Trust me when I tell you, I deeply regret starting painting and decorating the house. Let me just start with that. A little while ago, as part of that, we've been both painting together. So we've been kind of involved together as a team on the project, and we were painting the downstairs cloakroom. And I noticed, frankly, that Mrs. Chandler was a bit slapdash. I felt that the quality of her work wasn't where it needed to be. This presented an immediately slightly awkward opportunity for a difficult conversation. So I can tell you that I started by very, very dancing around this subject through the zone of comfortable debate. So the zone of comfortable debate for me included, how are you? Hey, Ange. Her name's Angela, by the way. Hey, Ange. It's going all right, isn't it? How are you finding the painting? Yeah, me too. And what do you think? How do you think it's going in terms of the quality of the painting that we're doing? I could see her starting to tune into me. At this point, I hadn't got into the zone of uncomfortable debate, but I could kind of feel myself starting to go there. But every part of my body, even with my own wife, this is terrible, isn't it? Maybe I need relationship work, made me want to stay in the zone of comfortable debate and not jump into the zone of uncomfortable debate. But I knew that if I didn't jump into the zone of uncomfortable debate, that effectively we would never really get to the heart of the matter. So I chose to say, look, one of the things I've noticed, here we go, one step into this zone. One of the things I've noticed is actually, where you were painting the skirting boards, like it looked like you were kind of rushing, I think, because there's loads of drips and there's paint all over the floor. And I wondered what was going on. Now, what's interesting about that, apart from the fact that we are still married, was a couple of things came out. The first is that conversation then progressed to two things. The first was, I think I got to what I thought was the heart of the matter, which is actually, she wasn't taking enough care and attention. Like my perfectionist thing coming through. But actually, that wasn't the heart of the matter. As a result of going into the uncomfortable debate, the heart of the matter was she felt incredibly rushed by an individual who has always had a hurry up driver. And because of that, because she feels she needs to do the work really quickly, it felt like she was having to rush and therefore not pay as much attention to it. And in fact, therefore, the feedback for me was stop rushing, start to lay down a plan, and let's agree some realistic timeframes for getting this work done. So I wanted to kind of voice the idea that actually there's that tipping point in a conversation, which is about moving into the zone of uncomfortable debate. For me, I did that by steeling myself, having some courage to kind of say, maybe not brilliantly, but to have a go at saying what was on my mind and what I was noticing, but not being so attached to it that I wasn't open to exploring that there might be several different hearts to this particular matter. Anybody recognize that for themselves? Anybody recognize that moment in a conversation when actually you get an opportunity to go into the zone of uncomfortable debate? For some of you, and this includes me, there are times when we avoid that. There are times that we'll just do anything we can to get out of that. Thank you, Meg. I get that too. But there are other times when, in fact, what would happen if we were just to take that little step? So I'm interested in, what are your go-to words and phrases when you are, yeah, thanks, Joanne. I feel like really bad to share all of that. I feel like I've been mean, but honestly, let's go into, what are your favorite go-to words and phrases when it comes to moving a conversation into the zone of uncomfortable debate? Have you got any phrases or words or thoughts about what helps you? Yeah, Lewis, thank you. Yeah, so here's what I would here's how I would do it. Yeah, thank you. What other thoughts are there about your own go-to words and phrases that help you to move more into the zone of uncomfortable debate and through that zone? Thank you, Camille. Yeah, perhaps we should consider. Joan, thank you. The risk if we, yeah, what can I do to help? Thanks, Flo. Yeah, there's something beautiful about that, isn't there? I start with I wonder. Yeah, Nadia, I do too, by the way. I love that. I've dined out on I wonder. And I've also dined out on one of Brené Brown's phrases, I think, which is the story I tell myself about this is the story I tell myself about this relationship. The story I'm telling myself about what just happened the other week was, I'm just wondering what you think. That's interesting. What else? What other conversation starters might you have? Yeah, I've noticed, and this makes me wonder. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Felicity. There's something about that, isn't there? So look, it's just a thought or idea, and if it's no good, we can screw it up and throw it away, but I'm putting it in here as something which is on my mind. Yeah, thank you, Sean. So we can, rather than assert ourselves, we can suggest things. For those of you who are coaches and facilitators, we're so used to suggesting something or inviting people in. Look, I just want to invite you into a conversation about X. What do you think? Yeah, thank you, Nadia. All right, lovely. So we get the idea. So already there are great ideas out there about what we can do. For those of you that prefer a bit more Brené Brown, then the engaged feedback checklist from Dare to Lead is really, really worth a look at. We'll send some more information about this, but this is really lovely. This is kind of almost about what are the things that we need to attend to be in the right place to give feedback. So loads and loads of really, really great ideas, which we will come back to, but I want to move on if I can quite quickly. One of the things we can do is, yes, we can read about Brené Brown. Yes, we can come onto a free lunchtime webinar about handling difficult conversations. But the other thing that we can do if we want to become maybe even better at handling difficult conversations is we can do what the world of neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, would say is called modeling. So modeling in its essence is really about this idea of trying to look at somebody who we think does this really well and understanding what is it exactly that they do to do this well. So it is often a kind of, a couple of weeks ago, I went out with somebody, I went out with a group of people I used to work with. I didn't tell the individual because I thought it would be a bit weird. But when I need to have a really difficult conversation, if I'm really worried about it and I'm thinking, God, right, how can I do this well? I actually remember doing some work with this individual where they shared with me exactly how they have difficult conversations, what they're thinking, how they're feeling, almost a process they go through. And in truth, I started to learn from them. And I often kind of inhabit them. I mean, that's why it sounds weird, doesn't it? But I often inhabit them, their kind of persona. And it really gives me the strength and, in truth, the tactics to be able to have more effective conversations. Good example of modeling comes from Kim Morgan, our founder and CEO. She was doing some work with a client quite a while ago. She tells a story where this client presented herself as somebody who found it very difficult to have to present to groups of people. And so Kim invited this individual to kind of model herself maybe on somebody who she knows had those really strong presentation and presence kind of skills. And so the client did some work to model themselves on them and presented in a way which was completely different, supremely confident, balanced, powerful, impactful. And Kim asked this individual, well, who did you learn from? Who are you modeling then? And the lady said, King Henry VIII. I mean, you can't believe it, can you? But anyway, said King Henry VIII. Like, they come across to me as somebody who's like supremely powerful, very clear, very present, very strong. You can see my body language kind of growing here as I'm doing this. Now, that's an extreme example. I'm not saying that you need to be a historical figure, but there is something very powerful in the world of NLP about modeling in particular. Can any of you think of people who you believe are particularly good in your world at having difficult conversations. That if you took some time to sit down with them and say, hey, help me understand, how do you do this? That could be really, really powerful. Anybody got any ideas? Share them on chat if you have. You don't have to share who the people are, but are there people you think you could learn from? Or maybe are there people who could learn from you? Because maybe you're here not because you find it difficult to have conversations, you're just fascinated by difficult conversations. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. We've got a little bit of time, but only a bit of time left. So I'm going to share with you one technique for gaining a wider perspective around maybe a difficult relationship or issue. And then I'm going to share with you very quickly one framework for having a difficult conversation that might be useful that I personally employ. Okay, so perceptual positions is the tool and technique. It lends itself beautifully from, I think, the world of NLP in particular. And perceptual positions is an opportunity for us to personally reflect from 3 different positions about a difficult relationship in this particular case. So I'm going to talk you through how this works. It is known, I think, in the world of NLP as a meta mirror, but it's a very powerful, very simple technique that you can use to gain a wider perspective. If you've used this before, and if you like it, or if you've used it before and you don't like it, either way, make yourself known. I'd love to hear whether you've actually looked at this before from your own perspective. So it goes like this. And maybe one way to do this is I'm going to invite you now to think of a relationship that perhaps is a bit tricky for you, or about a situation with a certain person that may lead to a difficult conversation. So can I just check? Yeah, thank you. Three chairs is often known as well, Beth. Yeah, thank you. Can I ask you to just maybe hold that person in your mind? So this technique, when it's used really purely, is about the idea of having 3 positions. Position 1, let's say I'm in position 1 now, is as me. So I will be asking that person, what are you thinking, feeling, and experiencing about that other person? So this is me thinking about that other person and that relationship. So it does work really well, Julie, doesn't it? So position 1, thinking about it from your perspective, what are you thinking, feeling, and experiencing about that relationship? And you'd spend a couple of minutes just collecting your thoughts about what's going on for you from your own perspective, through your own eyes, in your own body. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you experiencing? You can jot down some thoughts, or frankly, you don't have to do anything apart from sit there and be, and just take some time out to acknowledge the true, as far as you're concerned, reality of that relationship and the issues that are sat in that relationship. You can then move from being you, and you're given an opportunity to take a second position. Sometimes people actually physically move, as I think was mentioned earlier by Beth. There are 3, you can have 3 chairs, actually 3 chairs, physical chairs. So you go and sit in the second chair. And that is actually, when you sit in the second chair, you are sitting as if you are that other person. So really interesting. As you're sat there as the other person, again, the question to you will be, as that person, as if you were them, how are you experiencing this relationship? So you would literally become them in that split second, in that moment, and you would be looking at the relationship from that perspective. The questions would be the same. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? And what are you experiencing? And of course, we know this. We hear people saying, you need to stand in other people's shoes and you'll get to appreciate it. You'll get to really get some insights that you haven't got elsewhere. That's true. But what's really powerful about this technique is not those first 2 positions. I mean, they count and they matter. But once you've spent some time as the other person, you then get to spend time, he says, shifting over slightly, in this 3rd position. And that is as an observer. So an independent observer. Imagine somebody who has no real interest in either of those first 2 positions, but is there sat listening and watching what's going on. giving them an opportunity to talk about what is it when you're sat in that chair, you're an independent observer, what can be said to be true about what you've just witnessed from the first position and the second position. So that is a really powerful place to be, that of independent observer. And once you've done that, you can then eventually move back to the first position and say, right, okay, so having sat in the first, second, and third position, what now feels true? What insights are available to me? And when you do this, and when you spend time on it in particular, what you'll notice is that you will often become aware and have greater insights about what's really going on. You might have a tiny, imperceptible, but still a shift in how you see that relationship. And that can be a really, really powerful place to be in particular. Yeah, and I agree, Julie, it can really help to create light bulb moments. So if you get an opportunity and you want to try that out for yourself, feel free. You can do no harm, I'm sure, providing you make sure that when you're in the first position, you are you. In the second position, you assume the position as if you are the other person. And the third position can become an independent observer. It might be a real person who you know would have a neutral view, but it could equally be just an independent observer in particular. I don't know what you think of that, but give it a go. It might be worth it. You might have even been playing along as we were going then, by the way. Finally, I promise finally, because I'm starting to get hoarse. There's a nice model. There are loads of different models, by the way, that you can adopt. I quite like the SBI model. I've been using that recently, personally been using it. And I thought just quickly talking about when you have to give maybe developmental feedback, that perhaps this could be a model that you could choose to use. No need to write it down because I promise we'll send it out. But this is really the idea of following some kind of framework to enable you to have that structure. You still don't know where it's going to go when you enter into the conversation, but it's a good starting point. So this would say, start with a situation. So look, provide some context to the other person about the context and situation, the time and place, what's been going on, what you've noticed. Make sure that you talk about what is the behavior that you've witnessed. Remember, we're differentiating between a person and their behaviors. So, for example, I noticed that you behaved in a way which felt like the behavior was one of frustration rather than you were frustrated. You came across as frustrated. Actually, your behavior was one of frustration. The impact, being really clear about what was the impact as a result of that particular behavior. So, for example, as a result of that frustration, the impact was, well, first of all, I felt like I closed down because I was starting to get really anxious and nervous about entering further into the conversation. I also noticed in the room that the energy really, really dropped. And I felt, therefore, that the impact was one of us not making the progress that perhaps we could have made, which is really interesting. The alternative behavior is where it gets powerful. So actually, what I'd have really liked to have seen was maybe naming the frustration. That would have really helped. And I'd have really liked to have seen this instead. And I think had that happened, this is the impact I would have seen. But of course, this model is not a one-way kind of monologue. This is a model that can be used, but only as part of a balanced exchange that takes place with the other individual. So maybe you've got your own preferences. I don't know whether you've got other frameworks that you like to use. But I really use this a lot. Yeah, Meg, thanks for that. I really like that too. I'm glad that's useful for you. But do you have other preferences? Do you have other type of models that you like to use? Yeah, thanks, Nadia. There's another one that I sometimes roll out, by the way, although I don't use so much. I'm not quite sure why, called the clean feedback model. I haven't got that with me right now, but maybe we'll include that, Chris, in the details that we send out. So I think for me, that's probably it. We've had enough. You've been so great listening in and engaging with loads of stuff. For those of you, here's a bit of a plug, but for those of you that are interested, you can't see it. You can see it on the screen. We've got our Leader as Coach pocketbook, £9.99. Just about without the postal strikes, you've got a chance of getting it before Christmas. So I'm going to ask Chris to drop a link in to the Leader as Coach, but that really is worth having a look at. In particular, lots of tools and tips and loads of stuff that you might enjoy, I hope, in a pocketbook. So you can put it in your bag or pocket, funnily enough. We also have, I don't know whether you can see these. Oh my goodness, it only just shows it. But anyway, we have our beautiful picture cards. I'm not sure, Chris, whether you can share the screen to show our beautiful picture cards. But these are, thank you, Chris, that's great. These are beautiful abstract pictures and metaphors. I actually use these when I want to explore the quality of the relationship that I have with an individual. So I'll often get these picture cards out, put them face up on the table, and I will invite the other person, as I will as well, to say, look, I'm just wondering what's going on with our relationship at the moment, and could you pick a, okay, I'll stop sharing. Could you choose a card that helps to describe how you're seeing the relationship, how you're experiencing the relationship right now? And when that happens, again, you find that the power of picture, the power of metaphor, really enables some really powerful kind of conversations to follow around the relationship in particular. Okay, thank you. Yes, thanks, Chris. You haven't got any pictures of the actual cards themselves. Like, obviously, that's a box, but if you have, that's great. But if not, don't worry, we can send those out some other time. And I think that's it. So honestly, thanks so much. Yeah, Eve, if you drop us a note afterwards at info@barefootcoaching.co.uk. So info@barefootcoaching.co.uk, do that. And also, if you want to, feel free to link in with me. Andy Chandler, that's me. I'm on LinkedIn. You'll find me, I promise you. But really, a big thank you, all of you. This is our final webinar of the year. So thank you for showing such interest. Look after yourselves. Go well. Good luck with being the authentic, wonderful people that you are. Aren't we all a little bit imperfect? And we try really hard to be as good as we can be. These conversations matter. It's not about perfection, though. It's just about having them in the first place. So go well. I hope you've enjoyed that, and see you all very soon. Thank you so much for your time.